can't tell you how glad I am to be with all of you. And Dr. Javed Akhtar, who invited me, and all of you associated with this incredible organization. And I was glad that at least I could see some minutes of the presentation about the clinics and dental places that you're supporting in needy areas in Hyderabad and maybe elsewhere too, and supporting also the Rohingya, who are not greatly welcomed, I'm afraid, in most of India. But yes, all of you who are at this occasion during this very important and sacred time of Ramzan, your thoughts are on fundamental matters, deeper matters, and of course today, what can be more fundamental and deeper than what is happening in all over the world, but especially in India too with COVID, and the unbelievably disturbing news that has come in the last day or two or three. Some of our neighboring countries too are badly affected: Bangladesh, Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, but none as severely and as seriously affected as India. So you're all doing something amazing, and I thank the Almighty for all of you. And you're also aware that with this large number of infections and fatalities in India for COVID, some of you may have seen the latest story in the New York Times with pictures. It's a very grim story. Those of you who have not done it may want to look at it online. It is very sobering, very concerning indeed. And as the number of the sick multiply, the health professionals themselves are exhausted and infected and sick. And this is true, of course, everywhere, including here. But it is particularly true, I find, the moment in India. The exhaustion, infection, sickness, fatality also among the health professionals. Just now, before I clicked on the link and joined this virtual occasion with all of you, I received a message from a wonderful friend of mine called Faisal Khan, who is one of the active leaders of the Khudai Khidmat Gaz in India. He is from Western UP, and for many years he has been assisting people of all kinds. And he just sent me some pictures of volunteers of the Khudai Khidmat Gaz in the Delhi area who overnight are visiting, some people who are in their homes isolated and getting some kind of treatment or some chance to recover, and they need replenishment of their oxygen cylinders. So these friends have been going in the middle of the night after a long day's work to replace their oxygen cylinders and trying also to refill them. Of course, as we all know, of the terrible scarcity of oxygen too. Now, sometimes because I want to understand what is happening not just in India but in the neighborhood, I sometimes look at the Dawn website, Pakistan, DAWN.com. Dawn is a leading newspaper published in Karachi, but also has an edition in Lahore and Islamabad, I think. And in the latest Dawn issue, there are stories of many Pakistanis who are deeply concerned about India, not just the officials, but ordinary Pakistanis who want to help in any ways. And some of you may have heard of the AMPI Foundation. If you haven't, you should hear of it. This is an incredible organization in Pakistan. And they provide relief whenever there is a disaster or a serious illness. And I've met some people of the AMPI Foundation, both in Pakistan and when they visited India. And they they've offered now to send ambulances and crews along with their ambulance fleet if India can make use of them. So but the empathy from the ordinary people of Pakistan is a very interesting factor in today's situation. Incidentally, the Chinese also are offering help if Indians are willing to take it. But this is also interesting because there is very sad, unfortunate clash between India and China, and of course, misunderstanding between India and Pakistan. So we hope that in God's good time, some sanity will return. Now, this being the Ramzan occasion, time, I'm aware of the amazing thing that happens in the entire Muslim world, all over the world. People fasting, people praying, people thinking of others. It is an incredible time of involvement, engagement, compassion. People get out of themselves and their selfish interests. It is a sacred season in the world. I'm aware of that. Now, some of you may know, although it was not there need not have been there in the introduction of my connection with Gandhiji, Mahatma Gandhi, who was my father's father. Gandhi had 4 sons, and my father Devdas was the youngest of the 4 sons. But I had another grandfather, my mother's father. And he was from southern India, and not all of you, but maybe your parents, some of your parents would have heard the name of my mother's father. His was a short, simple name called Chakravarti Rajagopalachari. And he was a Tamil speaker from South India, and his daughter Lakshmi, my mother, married Gandhi's son Devdas. Now, Rajagopalachari, or sometimes known as CR, sometimes known as Rajaji, did very interesting things in the political world and in other ways. But he also wrote some amazing books on spirituality, on moral values, ethical values. He was like Gandhi, he was an absolutely passionate believer in unity and friendship between the Muslims and the Hindus of the subcontinent. He lived till the ripe age of 94. And of course, Gandhi, my father's father, died when I was 12 and a half. But Rajagopalachari, Rajaji, CR, lived till I was 37, he was 94. So I had many long conversations with him. And he would, from time to time, speak to me and to others in the family of the faith in the Almighty that he felt that many simple, everyday Muslims possessed. And sometimes, and I was present when he did this on 1 or 2 occasions, if people came to him with reports of some close relative of theirs was seriously ill, sometimes he would say, if you have a Muslim friend, ask your Muslim friend to pray. And he had this notion that the prayer of a devout Muslim would perhaps be heard by the Almighty. So I was, now CR was a very devout Hindu, and he wrote some wonderful books about Hindu ideas. But he had this respect and awareness of the deep faith that so many Muslims have in the Almighty. And today, all over the world, faith in God has greatly weakened. There was the communist control over so many countries. So many countries became openly and strongly atheist. And many Christian communities where communism had come had lost their faith in the Almighty. Not all of them, but many of them. But this was very rarely the case with the Muslims, who were absolutely unwilling to give up their faith in the Almighty. So I since this is the Ramzan time, and I wanted to mention my mother's father's very deep respect for the faith in the Almighty that the average Muslim man, woman, child has. Now, the young lady who should have spoken instead of me spoke about some of my books, Understanding the Muslim Mind. And there's a book that I wrote also, The History of Punjab. When India was partitioned in 47, the worst killings took place in Punjab, in what was once undivided Punjab. Many of you may not be aware that there was once this huge province of Punjab in British ruled India. Much of it went to Pakistan, some of it came to India. What came to India was further divided into Punjab, Haryana, and Himachal Pradesh. But the tragic killings of 47, the great bulk of them took place in both halves of Punjab. And so I wanted to find out why those killings had taken place. So I went deep into a story of Punjab. So I wrote a history of Punjab from the time of Aurangzeb, who died in the year 1707, to the time of Mountbatten, 1947. So 240 years of history of Punjab. And this book that was mentioned, my Tale of Two Revolts, there was the 1857 revolt in India against British rule, which was not successful. But around the same time, great changes were taking place in the United States, and the southern states were revolting against Union government. And then Lincoln had to declare a war, and there was a war. It's called the Civil War. Many of you in America have read about it. But when the Civil War was taking place here, the 1857 movement had just been suppressed by the British in India. So I wrote this story about what was happening in India at that time and what was happening in America at the time. And I wrote it primarily for people of Indian origin, many of whom now live in the United States. In some cases, not in all cases. In some cases, some people of Indian origin have parents, one half linked to India, one half linked even racially to America, mixture of races. So many youngsters, and even if they don't have mixed races in their blood, they certainly are connected to both cultures. So I wrote that book for young people of Indian origin living in the United States. So I hope that some youngsters may, by mistake or by plan, find that book called A Tale of Two Revolts. Not so easy to find on Amazon, but determined people can find it. Anyway, all this is... one more thing I will say. I've written a number of biographies, including of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, incredible man who was a Pashtun or a Pathan, as it used to be called in those days. Incredible man who lived till the age of 98, one of the most amazing men that the last century had produced. He died in Pakistan. He's buried in Jalalabad in Afghanistan. And I had the privilege of writing his biography too. I mentioned this because, yes, I've written about Gandhi, I've written about Rajaji, I've written about Vallabhbhai Patel. Some of you have heard of him. But I am interested in people, and you're listening to me, but actually I would like to listen to all of you and know more about your lives, because all of you have, I'm sure, something very interesting and also quite valuable in their lives. But that is just to tell you of what my interests are. I want to know about people and to know about their lives. Now, I've been asked by Dr. Akhtar to speak about India today, Gandhi to Modi's pluralism still alive. And I will speak about that. The Indian reality is really, really bad, as you know. I don't have to tell you this. It is very bad. Now, it can be said, in the United States, we know that apart from the very small Native American community, which has very tough life, the community that really receives the rough end of the stick in the US is the Black community, the African American community. And they are having a very difficult time here. So who are the equivalents in India of the Blacks of the United States? So my understanding and my study tells me that the equivalents of the Blacks who are suffering so much in the US, in India, are three kinds. It is at the bottom layer of India, comparable to the bottom layer of the United States, has three groups. One of these three groups are the Dalits of India, the so-called untouchables, former untouchables, they were called. And they are about 15, 16% of the Indian population, and they are indeed horribly, horribly treated. Another group in that bottom category of India, the oppressed category, are the Adivasis, the tribals they're called. Sometimes they're called the STs, the scheduled tribals. And they are also in all parts of India. They're about 8% of the population. They're also very badly treated. And the third group in the bottom layer of Indian society are the Muslims of India. And they are at least 14%, maybe 15% of the Indian population. And you can imagine what that is when you know that the Indian population is close to 1.4 billion. So there are these over 200 million people, Muslims, and they also are ill-treated and oppressed in today's India. So this is a reality that has to be recognized, and some people recognize it, and it has to be expressed. It has to be communicated even to our friends in the United States, people of who may not be of Indian origin, Americans of any origin, need to know that the reality in India is of the oppression of these three groups: the Dalits, the Adivasis, and the Muslims. Now, the very idea of India is under attack today. The preamble to our constitution starts with "We the people of India." But the attackers of democracy in India, the attackers of equality in India, have inserted a kind of asterisk after "We the people of India." And the asterisk says the people of India means the Hindus of India. That the Hindus of India are the ones who should enjoy the rights. The rest should somehow manage life under the control or the domination of the Hindus. This is the notion of some people. Now, the democracy has so many institutions. It is the federal structure. India is also, like the United States, has many states, and power is divided between the national or federal government, central government, and the state governments. But in recent years, in the last few years, nominated governors and defections have helped the BJP to form governments, even though the party lacked a majority in 4 states. It happened in Goa and Manipur in 2017, in Karnataka in 2019, Madhya Pradesh in 2020. This is just one example of what has happened. The biggest attack on India's federal structure, of course, occurred in August of 2019, when in a sudden overnight move, Jammu and Kashmir, which is the only Muslim majority state of India, it enjoyed special autonomy under the arrangement which was arrived at in the late 1940s. But in August of 2019, Jammu and Kashmir was not just taken over by the central government. It was split into 2 bits, and it was downgraded from a state into 2 union territories. It lost its autonomy, it lost its statehood, it lost its unity, it split into 2. And all this happened very swiftly, very quickly, without any discussion. Of course, not a single Kashmiri was consulted when this happened. Not one. Not a single Kashmiri was consulted when this was done. Then there is Delhi, India's capital territory, like the Washington, D.C. area. Unlike Washington, D.C., the people of Delhi have votes. They have a state government, an elected government. Delhi is a state. But last month, after a quick, short discussion, India's parliament approved the Modi government's decision to downgrade Delhi's elected government and compel Delhi's elected government to carry out the wishes of the nominated lieutenant governor of Delhi, nominated by the federal government. The powers of India's parliament are also being diminished. Using its majority in both houses, the Modi government has enacted laws without discussion and by circumventing committees of parliament. This was the case, most notably, with the farm laws recently, which farmers across India have opposed. And they've opposed it with protests which they've conducted in winter and in summer, week after week for 7 months now, ongoing protests. Now, there is something called the Election Commission, which conducts India's elections. It was once quite prestigious. It's quite independent. But in the recent cycle of elections still taking place in different parts of India, different states of India, supposed to be conducted by the Election Commission, supposed to be completely independent, autonomous body. But sadly, it has not shown a real independence or impartiality. So Tamil Nadu, which held its election on a single day, on the 6th of this month, West Bengal, also having elections, has a population larger than Tamil Nadu, but only somewhat larger. But while Tamil Nadu had its election on a single day, the BJP is a minor player in Tamil Nadu. But in West Bengal, which the BJP is determined to win, and to win which Narendra Modi and Amit Shah and the BJP have spent vast sums of money and spared absolutely no effort to defeat the present government of West Bengal. There, the elections are taking place in 8 different installments, on 8 different dates, starting with the end of March and ending with the end of April. And most people think, and there is reason to think like that all this is done to make it easier for the BJP to realize its aim of unseating the present government with the cooperation of the Election Commission. We all know that the BJP has advanced in West Bengal. It was a very minor player until a few years ago. Now it is the major opposition to the present government and may well succeed in toppling the present government there. But the BJP has advanced in West Bengal by scapegoating the state's 27% Muslim population. Now, West Bengal and Assam are 2 states where Muslims have a significant minority. It's 14% across India. In Assam, it's closer to 30%. In West Bengal, it's 27%. And the BJP has advanced in West Bengal by scapegoating the 27% Muslim population as anti-nationals. India's judiciary has been under assault, including by temptation. India's Supreme Court justices must retire at age 65. But 4 months after Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi retired in November 2019, he was nominated with his consent to the Rajya Sabha, taking advantage of a provision that allows the nomination of a handful of experts, artists, scientific and other. Now, individual judges in India's judiciary is a complex and vast institution. It has a Supreme Court, there are high courts in different states, and there are judges and magistrates at different levels. Individual judges across India have shown great independence and great courage in today's atmosphere, sometimes giving very brave and bold judgments. But the Supreme Court, sadly, has dodged many critical issues, refused even to hear some issues, refused to hear, for instance, this change in Kashmir. Many Kashmiris said this is against the constitution, but the Kashmiri case has not been discussed by the Supreme Court. The CAA protests, the citizenship laws that seem to discriminate on grounds of religion, and millions of Indians protested against those laws. And those laws, the Supreme Court has refused to hear on the constitutionality of those laws. The Delhi riots of February 2020 and the imprisonments made, according to many people, without any basis, many Muslims were arrested. But the Supreme Court has refused to hear petitions regarding those Delhi riots. The electoral bonds, which is a very curious and astonishing law, and many people want the Supreme Court to pronounce on the legality of that law. No hearing on that. The Rohingyas and the deportation of many Rohingyas, Supreme Court has not entertained a discussion on these matters. Now, there are agencies that enforce income tax laws, foreign exchange laws, laws against crime, laws against corruption. These are powerful agencies of the central government, supposed to be independent. But a few days back, one of India's leading newspapers, Indian Express, published a stunning list of raids by these agencies, all of them targeting opposition leaders. All of them. And all of them, or many of them, taking place at election time, against opposition leaders contesting elections or their close relatives. In at least 2 instances, opposition politicians whose homes and offices had been raided joined the BJP after the raids to protect themselves. Of course, more harrowing than anything else are the arrests and indefinite imprisonments of intellectuals, student leaders, union leaders, lawyers, human rights activists, a great proportion of them Muslim or Dalit or Adivasi, or from the other Hindu castes, but sympathetic to Muslims and Dalits and Adivasis. Umar Khalid, Sheila Rashid, Anantel Tumbre, many others. I don't have to give you the names. Now, in their overcrowded spaces, these incarcerated prisoners are now threatened by COVID as well. Equally harrowing are the murderous attacks in India's streets, India's lanes, in India's fields on vulnerable individuals, most of them Dalits, Adivasis, and Muslims. The pattern is consistent. Victims, if they remain alive, victims of attacks. The victims, if they remain alive, or their relatives, will be pursued by the police for allegedly violating some law. Attackers will remain free and bold. Top leaders will remain silent. Judges will usually refuse to intervene, citing 2 words that can justify any oppressive deed: national security. So there is the terrifying fear in which many Muslims live, and the humiliation and the disguises that survival seems to require. Now, we know that the US too has its supremacists, its foes of equality. However, there's a crucial difference. When blatant injustice occurs in the US, influential voices speak out. The media report. Intellectuals write. Many in the dominant group side with the oppressed. Often, if not always, partly, if not wholly, sooner or later, some justice is rendered in the United States. In today's India, such mercies are rare. Now, I've been a journalist for good chunks of my life. Often in India's modern history, the media has highlighted and probed attacks on the weak. The media has spoken up for liberty, equality, dignity. No longer. Except for a few brave newspapers and outlets, this does not happen anymore. On India's TV channels, oppressors receive more generosity than the oppressed. Then there is the transmission into the Indian home and the Indian mind via technology and social media of ill will, suspicion, and hate directed at the country's Muslim minority. I'm afraid many in India blame, despise, ill-treat, and punish people not for what they have done, but for who they are. In some parts, the project to inject hate has been successful enough to make state-supported mob violence against Muslims a winning electoral strategy, at least for the short run. So there is this installation, dissemination, intensification of hate. Hate, that's a real issue. Plus fear. And many in the majority community who dislike this hate were very unhappy about it. But they're afraid of being left out of the hating crowd. They want to be part of the crowd. Hate and contempt have become fashionable in some circles. Moreover, Hindu supremacists feel that that time has come. Now, in India, the white supremacists realize that their time has left them, but they're trying to revive that. They have strong support, minority support in America, white supremacists. But in India, the Hindu supremacists feel that their time has come. They feel there's a global tide that's favoring supremacy of the dominant. And in India, they feel that there is some kind of historical sequence. This is their reasoning. There were Mughals, and then there were the British, and then there was the Congress, and now Hindus must rule India. The democracy has had its day, equality has had its day, supremacy's day has come. This is the belief of many. They don't openly say it. We still have the constitution. They don't openly say it. Even the other day, when 2 days ago, Narendra Modi spoke about the virus, and he spoke about various religious festivals, he mentioned Ramzan. He had to. So there is still at least in outward form, there is still the equality in India. India does belong still, according to the constitution. India belongs to everybody, and the Adivasi, the Muslim, the Dalit is as much an owner of today's India as any high caste Hindu. But that is only the outer appearance at the moment. Hindu nationalism has entered India's school textbooks, India's movies, India's universities. Public universities are increasingly governed by Hindu nationalists. So next time there are elections, will Modi be outvoted? Who knows? Will elections be fair? Who knows? Will parties opposed to him, BJP, come together? Who knows? There is hate and there is fear, but there's also ego. Many opposition politicians don't like to work with their associates and colleagues. They don't want to get together. So is there light at the end of the tunnel? I don't know the answer to that. Of course, eventually there will be. I also believe in the Almighty. I also believe that the Almighty will bring justice to this world, to India, to all the oppressed people, suffering people, sick people everywhere in the world. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but how long the tunnel is, I don't know. I also want to mention that there was light at the start of the tunnel or before we entered the tunnel. This is something that today it's easy to forget. When India became independent in 1947, India also became partitioned. Pakistan was created, later Bangladesh was also created, but India was divided. And there was great violence in 1947, as many of you know. And at that time, many in Pakistan were already saying that Pakistan should become an Islamic state, a Muslim state. And many in India said, if Pakistan is to become a Muslim state, then India should become a Hindu state. And because of the violence and the killings, many people were susceptible to this kind of argument. If Pakistan has a Muslim state, India should be a Hindu state. And India could have become a Hindu state in 47, 48. It did not become that. Gandhi and Nehru made sure that India would be a state for all. That was not automatic. That was not inevitable. But summoning great determination, great resolve, appealing to the greatest values in the human heart of the Indian people. Gandhi and Nehru and many others. Maulana Azad was there. Dr. Ambedkar was there. Many others. I need not name them, not only in central leadership, but across India, provinces and states. By an incredible attempt of courageous people of all backgrounds, India started off as a country for all when it could have been a Hindu supremacist country, even in 1947. So as we spend our time in the darkness of this tunnel, we should remember that there was a time when India could have gone that way. It did not. In fact, it became a democracy. It honored equality. And it became some kind of inspiration for the world as a whole. So this we ought to remember. Now, a couple of things I will mention. One is that this COVID thing and the terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy is bound to have an impact on the people. And many people, I don't know how many or what percentage, many people will question this supremacist notion, question Hindu nationalism, question the BJP, question Narendra Modi. How exactly this realization will make an impact on India's politics, it's not possible to say. But we can be absolutely sure that COVID has already caused a tremendous rethinking in the Indian mind. How the impact will play out is not possible to say. A couple of things before I close. There are similarities between the US and India. Both countries are large countries. Both countries are diverse countries. Both countries claim they believe in liberty, equality, dignity, fraternity, rule of law. So there is, if the US has survived the great challenges, Trump has been defeated. So similar country like India to the US, there should be, at least in theory, there is hope. And just recently in the United States, all of us have seen, after this verdict on the murder of George Floyd, how many people of all races in the United States came out to welcome and support this verdict. And that out of many, one spirit, one outlook is being created in the United States, not easily, not automatically, but it is being done. It has taken time, struggle, leadership. There are ups and downs in history, but it has happened in the United States in the past and very recently also. So that should give us some encouragement. Already we have seen in the US that, especially in coping with COVID in the last year and a half, great circles of mutual support and solidarity have been built all across the US, especially in the healthcare community. And now, I'm a recipient of healthcare. I'm not one of the givers of healthcare, but I watch the television programs and I see how many people of Indian origin, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Christians, Pakistani origin, Arabs, are part of the American healthcare team, men and women. It is fantastic to see this. Now, we must create similar circles of mutual support among young Indians and young South Asians. So one of the things I'm keen on is that all of us who live here, whether we are Indian citizens or American citizens, that we create circles to which others also belong, and where people different from us also have an active part. So building these small circles or large circles of mutual solidarity and support is the great challenge, and is the work for all of us. And the youngsters here, particularly, I invite them, I urge them to think about this, to create and strengthen these circles. In particular, I'm keen that we should have a greater solidarity between people of Indian origin and the African Americans. Now, many of you doctors, of course, you have an automatic relationship with people of all races. And, I've been to, I'm by the way, I should mention that I'm an Indian citizen. I'm here as a permanent resident, but I'm an Indian citizen. And I've recently been a lot in the US, but I've been mostly in India. But visiting the US off and on for the last 50, 60 years, I've often met African Americans who tell me, oh, we love our Indian doctor. At a time when others other African Americans didn't always have contact with others in the Indian community. They did have this deep contact with doctors, which is wonderful. So I'm particularly keen, for a number of reasons, for human reasons and for even for an impact in India, if we can enhance and deepen our solidarity with African Americans and with Latinos, that will make a very big impact, important for the future. So I will end here. I thank all of you, and I wish you all the best. I respect you for your fasting, for your commitment, for your concerns. And I know that you will be praying, and I'll be praying with you. And the Almighty doesn't answer all our prayers right away. Sometimes He answers some prayers. He does not answer all prayers. But like all of you, I also believe that ultimately the arc of history will bend towards justice and equality and compassion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Gandhi. You've left us with so much to think about, and that was just a really wonderful speech. I know that although there's a lot in there to feel down about and to feel discouraged about, I think you've really given us a good backdrop to why the work of an organization like AMPI is so vital and important. So thank you so much for focusing a lot of the end of your message on that. And I'd encourage people to please look in the chat. In the beginning of the chat, there's a link there to start your donations. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into the questions because several questions are coming in through the chat. And I'm just going to go in order of how they've come. This is from Noshin Akhtar, who says, thank you, Professor Gandhi, for your insights. There are unquestionable parallels between India and the US in current years, as you have mentioned. Do you think that the worsening pandemic in India will have the same outcome for outing the Modi government? And could this oddly be a hope for Muslims to improve their situation? And how do we overcome increasing hate?
So I would say that, yes, in the long run, the absolutely disappointing, to use a very mild word, performance of the government vis-a-vis the pandemic will cost the BJP a great deal. But as to when it will happen and how it will happen is very hard to say. We should remember that if elections were absolutely free and fair, and if the media was even modestly fair, if messages did go across, and if big money did not play such a fantastic role and other things did not play. So, if elections are fair, and some elections have been fair in India despite everything in recent years, it could make a difference to this government. But then, there are other countries we know where tyrants keep winning elections 90%, 95% again and again and again. So if the Indian system moves in that way, we don't know. But there can be absolutely no doubt that the tragic pandemic and the very large loss of life and the sheer hardship from hour to hour that the poor Indian has to face, the middle-class Indian has to face, has already greatly weakened Modi's popularity and the government's popularity. How to deal with this hate is a very real question. Part of your question, it's not easy to answer. And I think the only way to perhaps to begin to answer is for some of us to remain bonded with one another in absolutely unbreakable solidarity, and to speak truthfully, speak frankly, speak fearlessly. And if we can create, you might say, a kind of mini United India in United States. There's so many people in the US from India, so many millions now, in every conceivable department. And there are Hindus, and there are Muslims, and there are Christians and Sikhs, and there are Dalits and Adivasis. Let us create a prototype of Indian solidarity and Indian equality in the US, and that is bound to have an impact on India. this that Indians of all kinds, whatever their economic condition, whatever their political views, they're terribly affected by what Americans say or don't say. Even something in an American newspaper, even a letter to the editor in a small town American newspaper, a comment by some American writer, comment by American State Department spokesperson, some ranking by an independent institution that measures democracy, measures freedom of the press. These things have an impact on India. So if we can continue to inform fellow Americans of what is happening in India, of the great potential for greatness in India, and of the unfortunate attacks on democracy in India, that also will have an impact.
Thank you. This question comes in from Afreen Akhtar, who is asking, part of the problem in India is a lack of a strong opposition party. And so do you have any thoughts on how the Congress Party can rebuild itself?
Yeah, this is a very real question, and there's no doubt that the Congress has greatly weakened in the last several decades. It's not so easy to organize the revival, the re-strengthening of a party like the Congress. But I think we should also not expect that it all depends on whether or not the Congress becomes strong or not. I hope it will. And very often, say a man like Rahul Gandhi, some of the things he says are quite remarkable, and he's quite courageous. Yes, many people also criticize him. But there is something quite remarkable and courageous about many of the things that he says and does. But to get the Congress to become strong is a wish we may have. It's not so easy to organize it. Ultimately, it depends on some in the Congress who will say, we will somehow make this, we will, go out to the people and say, here we are. But it's not always easy in today's atmosphere. It's not a fair and equal playing field. But yes, we should strengthen every opposition party, not just the Congress. There are other opposition parties too. For instance, there is the DMK in Tamil Nadu. There are left parties. There are other parties in other parts of India. So if different opposition parties can be reformed, and if the different opposition parties can come together, that will certainly help. I'll stop there.
Thank you. This question comes in from Sohail, who I think, let me see if I understand this question. He's asking to Professor Gandhi, what is the best way to help secular Indians from here in the USA? So I think maybe, I'm not exactly sure. I think he's saying, so Indians who are not associated necessarily with specific categories.
Yeah, I suppose I understand. I think what the questioner is wanting to know is that there are many in India who are unhappy with the Hindu supremacy, who would like the equality and freedom provisions of the Constitution to really be applied to Indian life, how to strengthen such people. I think they will all be encouraged if we can keep our American friends informed of what is happening in India. And Americans, representatives in the Congress, the US Congress, even at the local level, city level. So if we can keep informing the United States, and if that is then expressed by Americans, their concern, their unhappiness at the attacks on democracy in India, that is one way of strengthening secular Indians. And the creation of solidarity groups in the United States. I underline that, even on a small scale, even at our cities, in our towns, if we can have Muslims and Hindus and Christians and Sikhs and others from India, along with, say, African Americans or other Americans, if we can build some circles of solidarity and somehow communicate that, that also will have some impact.
Thank you. This question comes in from Wase Humayun. Thank you, Professor Gandhi. Where do you see India in the next 10 years regarding all of this? I believe elections are still 3 years away, and the opposition party does not inspire even minorities. Lots of questions about the opposition parties.
Yeah. Where do I see India the next 10 years? This is very, very difficult question. Of course, end of this month, we will have some indication of some election results. We will also know how fair or the elections have been. I don't think we should spend too much time trying to figure out what will happen in the next 10 years in India. I think we have to take every issue as it comes. We must hold the Indian government to account on the question of how it addresses the pandemic. Honesty about the pandemic is very important. The latest New York Times story that I referred to says that in many cities, in more recent waves, the death count real count is 5 times the figures given by the government. So demanding that the Indian government is truthful about the pandemic figures is one way of putting pressure. So I guess what I'm saying is that we have to tackle each issue as it comes and not try to figure out over 10 years how opposition parties can come together. Whenever there is an issue of democracy, of human rights, of inequality, of oppression or suppression, we must raise our voices. And if we do that, I think good results should follow in due course.
I wanted to make sure I got in a question from the person who introduced you, that Zaina Ahmed, who's asking, what is the best way for young Indian Americans to try and create an impact on the elections in India?
Not easy to answer, but I'm glad you're thinking of it. But again, I would caution you, Zaina, that elections, are not everything. And don't imagine that because elections were fair in the United States last November, that they will necessarily be fair in the future in India. If democracy is booted out slowly or silently or step by step, elections are not everything. So I think young Indian Americans will create an impact if they can show solidarity across ethnic and religious divides. So when I mentioned the African Americans, supposing that young Indian Americans of different religious backgrounds, if they can also work with African Americans and Latinos on any project, it could be a local project, it could be help in India in some way, but any project, it could be helping somebody else, it could be helping Brazil, South Africa, Africa. But some common action across the religious divide, across the racial divide, undertaken by young people, Indian Americans and others, even on a local scale, will make an impact on the psychology of India, which ultimately will also have an impact on elections in India.
That's a great answer. And I have one question myself, because I think we probably are almost at the end of question time. How do you, this is more of a personal question, how do you maintain hope and motivation to continue to be an advocate and a change agent? And where does that motivation come from, and how do you nurture it?
Well, off and on, I get the chance to meet groups like yours. I meet people like Zaina and others of you. I need not only take her name. I take her name because that's the only name I've gotten to know. But, meeting all of you is one way in which my spirits are sustained and strengthened. But I also take heart from very little things. Sometimes the Almighty does not answer my big prayers, but He very often does answer small prayers. And He does give small blessings. So I cherish my small blessings. And so when I count them, I remember them, I remind myself of them. And I say, this has happened, this need not have happened, but it happened. And if this can happen in this small way, something larger will also happen one day. And of course, I'm old enough. I've seen so many changes. I've seen not only India become independent, I've seen Africa become independent. I've seen the Soviet Union get rid of Stalin. I've seen Hitler go out. I've seen apartheid go away in South Africa. So, but I also know from history that sometimes dark periods continue for a long time. So my faith, my optimism does not mean that things will improve very quickly or the way we want them to improve. I want myself and all of us to have the expectation that things can change and to work for change, but to be prepared, to be patient and patient and patient and keep fighting and rejoice in the tiniest evidence of improvement.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on.